Ridley Scott's Napoleon tells the epic story of the titular French emperor's rise to power, yet the scope and scale of its narrative repeats a mistake made by a previous box office bomb. Despite making $220 million at the box office, Napoleon received mixed reviews from critics and audiences, with praise for its design and performances tempered by a rushed story that failed to convey a complete picture of the real Bonaparte. Given the complexity of its subject, this was perhaps to be expected. However, while the film's ambition is undeniable, its execution was arguably predicted 19 years before its release. Starring Joaquin Phoenix as the legendary French leader, Napoleon's story spans several decades, chronicling some of his most significant triumphs and biggest defeats. Interwoven throughout the story is the relationship between Bonaparte and his first wife Josephine, meaning that the movie constantly switches between the personal and the political. Since its narrative plays out over several decades, the sweep of the story becomes a difficult balancing act that ultimately proves too complex to negotiate. Yet while the film's failure wasn't inevitable, it was suggested by a previous project that made many of the same mistakes. Alexander already proved Napoleon's story was too ambitious. Val Kilmer, Colin Farrell, and Angelina Jolie in Alexander. Although the two movies tell very different stories, Oliver Stone's 2004 historical epic Alexander already proved that Napoleon's extended look at the French emperor's life was the wrong approach. Like Scott's film, Alexander focuses on a totemic historical figure, in this case, the Macedonian king Alexander the Great, and tries to fit all the major events of his life into a single movie. However, just like Napoleon, Alexander's decades-long story quickly becomes unwieldy, with the movie simultaneously feeling sprawling and insufficient. There are differences between Alexander and Napoleon. For instance, Ridley Scott's movie makes a more explicit attempt to focus on personal details from Bonaparte's life, rather than scattering them among a broad chronology like Stone's film. However, while the specifics differ, the bones of the two projects are remarkably similar, with each stuck between conveying the scale of their subjects' achievements and reducing them to footnotes in a rushed compendium. Given that Alexander was panned upon release and made just $167 million against a $150 million budget, the evidence that some historical figures can't have their lives captured by a single movie was clear before Napoleon. Napoleon and Alexander would both have been better in a different format. Although both Napoleon and Alexander failed to fully capture their enigmatic subjects, their failure does not mean that the film's inspirations are unsuitable for dramatic treatment. However, considering how much both men accomplished, Alexander conquering an empire that stretched from Europe to India, and Napoleon becoming master of Europe, it's impossible to do their stories justice in one movie, no matter how long its runtime. Instead, both projects would have benefited from being turned into a TV series, or a similarly extended format.